Maybe discover.
that is proposed as part of the project. So in conclusion, staff is recommending approval of the use permit subject to the conditions that we included with the report, and that concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was negligent at the beginning of the meeting to state that any of the projects, if there's a decision made on that project tonight, you have an opportunity to appeal that decision to the City Council within 15 days. With that, questions of staff?
You go first.
A question regarding that breakdown on the parking and the fact that it's plaza. Does that supersede then in the Development Code 19.48.040 regarding number of parking spaces required?
Yes, it does. It's specific to this circumstance or situation.
And again, I believe you reiterated it, or iterated it, the background behind the requirement is, or no requirement for businesses facing the plaza, is the historic context of the development of the plaza, plus the fact that we have public parking on the adjacent streets?
That's correct. In many cases, properties that front the plaza have limited or no parking, as in this case, because of that development pattern over time. And so our code recognizes that changes in uses should be allowable despite that development pattern under certain circumstances.
Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, when was the parking standard in the development code for the plaza that you're referencing? When was that written?
Well, my only answer to that question at the moment is before I got here. So it actually, that parking credit predates the adoption of the development code, which occurred in 2003. And so I am not entirely sure when that parking credit concept was introduced. I'd have to research that, but we'd certainly be happy to do that.
But if it was before you got here, this is possibly, back in the 80s?
Before 1985.
Yeah. So that concept was based on a 1985 plaza parking demand?
Well, I think that the concept actually is based on the fact that buildings like this particular building is 106 years old, as well as others on the plaza, exist, and they exist without any parking on site. And that concept is based really on an impulse of historic preservation, I believe, that allows for these buildings to continue to be reused without having them considered as legal nonconforming.
I guess my question is maybe more about the ratio. For example, if that was sort of based on, like, let's say we had 100,000 square feet of commercial in the downtown area. I don't know exactly how many square feet we have, but let's, just round number. And so we sort of divided it based on footage, based on the amount of parking spaces that exist, and based on just roughly maybe the uses that were there when the code was written. And I'm just wondering, like, as a restaurant use is more intense than office. I'm just wondering when the last time that code was sort of checked in terms of the number of available parking spaces.
Well, I think I would look at it I understand what you're getting at. I think another way to look at it, though, is that, the uses, the plaza has been pretty stable for many, many years now. And for example, new uses have been introduced into the plaza, and new development has been introduced in the plaza over the years, but it's been relatively modest in scale for the most part. And so, for example, one of the more notable developments that's occurred in the plaza would be the Mercado 2 building, because that's this entirely new commercial structure, two-story building. Parking was required for that building. So, although you had this new development occur, presumably the overall balance didn't change as a result of that particular project because they added parking. That said, over time, uses in different historic buildings have intensified, but it's also the case where they've declined. And so it wasn't that long ago, just in our most recent recession, that you have many buildings, historic or not, that were underutilized, and so don't contribute so much to parking demand. So I feel like this parking credit provides stability. I would have to admit that the last time it was looked at in terms of, gee, is it appropriate to do this or maintain this at this level, would have been in 2003, because that's the last time we did a comprehensive update of our parking regulations.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, more general question about parking and takeout, because one of the components of the application is takeaway food, and I know that we've approved takeaway food in the past. This might be a little unique in the sense that prepackaged food, people coming up for lunch, getting a sandwich or a salad and then taking it away. My question has to do with short-term parking, like 30-minute parking, 15-minute parking. Right now, we really lack that, and so I'm wondering, in the past, have we required time-limited parking when an application has proposed takeaway in the downtown?
Not in any application that I can recall. Most recently, we had Slice by Mary's come before, and they were kind of a takeout operation focus. That was certainly not discussed or required at that point in time. David, do you know of other examples or instances?
No, I'm not aware of it having.
I can think of an example.
Oh, great.
At Union Bank, there's a green curb right at the corner for limited parking.
Yes, and the only other example that I can think of, although this too, I believe predates me, is that I think that there's a green zone in front of the dry cleaners
Yes.
on Broadway.
Yeah.
So there are some examples of that. It's just that they're not necessarily recent examples, and it's something that could be suggested as part of this project, but the project applicants could not implement that. It would be up to the city to implement that through the Traffic Safety Committee.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know what venue that could be considered to make sure that the use, if approved, is successful, in that part of it. So, thank you.
Rob, I understand that the employee parking is assumed and embedded in that formula for the restaurant parking. Does the code say anything more about that issue of employee parking in any other location? I didn't see anything. They have 10 employees for this project proposed. Is that something we should look at, or is that just pretty much in the formula with no more details somewhere else in the code?
Well, we do view it as being, or the staff parking being included in the ratio for a restaurant. It's specifically called out for other uses, and for uses that it's not listed, it's part of that ratio. I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Well,
of
the
your
real question was, does this say anything about the volume of employees? Because somebody could have 50 employees or 10.
The code section for parking specific to a restaurant use does not delve into the number of employees that a business could have.
Okay, thanks.
Carol?
David, can I ask you a question about the status of the negotiations between the city and the state on the parking with the behind the General Vallejo and the Sonoma Cheese Factory, the parking lot there, and the adjacent parking area that could be designated for parking but is not yet improved, that the state apparently owns?
I don't have any significant update for you. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we're in negotiations. They seem pretty positive, but until they're concluded, there's really no way to for me to be any more specific than that about the possible outcome.
Are you involved in those negotiations?
Yes?
Okay. Is the city manager and members of council and so forth involved in those negotiations also?
Yes. I mean, when it comes to just the direct back and forth, that is the city manager and myself. We have council authorization to be in these negotiations, and the council in, closed session settings directs our efforts. So that's how that works, and that which is, I imagine, typical.
Do you have any idea about, like, the timing in terms of when there might be closure on this issue?
Well, I think that if all goes well, and again, I'm at least reasonably optimistic about these negotiations, that we might be looking at September and October to, have an outcome.
Other questions of staff? Seeing none, I'm going to open the public hearing then, and I would give the applicant an opportunity to speak to us. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Steve Martin. Address is 130 South Main Street, Sebastopol. I'm a registered civil engineer and the president of Steve Martin Associates. Our role in this project has been working with the applicants prior to the lease of the building through the land planning, the use permitting. We've also done the architectural design, the structural engineering, and are the general contractor. So we're truly involved in the whole comprehensive part of this project. We've worked closely with city staff on the preparation of the use permit and the proposed project before you. I do have to compliment both David and Rob for their work on this. It's been very timely. I think the staff report is accurately describes the project. I think it's thorough and adequately addresses the minimal impacts. Would like to point out that working with them, we wanted to develop a project that not only met the owner's goals and needs, but also was, of course, in compliance with the general plan policies, and the zoning. And then seemingly also, we asked them what would be attractive or needed in the city. And that's the project before you. So we're pretty confident with this project that it will be successful to both the community and the local businesses, drawing more businesses to the neighboring businesses around us. The one thing that Rob left out but is in the staff report that I wanted to emphasize is that we also did go through design review on this project. We received 9-0, I think it was, or unanimous approval of the project, and it was very positively received by all. We do understand that there are 3 people that have raised concern over the parking in the square related to this project. We specifically designed the size of it to comply with the parking requirements as Rob's outlined. It just so happens too in the design of this restaurant and market, with having equivalent facilitation on the first floor with the second floor, having a kitchen down at the first floor, bars on both floors, we would have ended up with about a 60 to 64 seat restaurant, coincidentally. So it does fit the space. Further, in regards to the parking, we know it's both a public and a city issue around the square. Todd Family Outpost will direct their employees to park in the 2 off-street parking lots in the area. They also are committed to focusing hiring their employees from the local community. They can't guarantee that, but that is truly going to be their focus, and Jared will speak more to that. Additionally, the employees will be encouraged to carpool where practical. But I think hiring employees locally too will help, because the parking need should subside for that aspect of it. And then lastly, regarding parking, Both Top Family and our office, SMA, are committed to participate in any working groups that are developed through the city or through the public to, strategize on improving the parking situation in the vicinity. And so I'd like to keep my presentation or my introduction short. I'm here to respond to any questions you all may have now or at the end of the public comment. And again, I'd like to thank staff for preparing this in such a timely manner. And following me will be Jared Clevenger. He's representative of Top Family Outpost. He's also the project manager for the business itself.
Any questions at this time?
Okay.
Continue on then.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Hi, I'm Jared Clevenger. My address is 626 Mills Lane, St. Helena, California. I live part-time in New York with the long-distance relationship that I have. I wanted to share in the sentiment with the staff reports and kind of the feedback that we've been getting from the commission as well is we want to do what's right. And we saw the evolution of the project to add more to the community by being a restaurant, being a marketplace, sharing in that long-term commitment that Sonoma's had to being a focal point for the community, not just Sonoma, but the county of Sonoma in California and Northern California. So being on the square and being in the plazas, it's important for us to share that. I'm here to answer questions too, conceptually. Thanks again.
Any questions? Okay.
I actually have a question
Okay, go ahead.
for Jared. Is that your name? Can you tell us a little more about your business? I mean, are you from Sonoma? Do you have Sonoma products?
Yeah, we currently produce wine from Sonoma County, Napa County, Lodi, Mendocino. So we're producing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in both things and have been for about 5 years. We haven't had a place to showcase them, as winery space is limited, not having the choice to kind of pick and choose where we want to be and not having had a family property for a long time. We aren't vested in that way, but being in the area for more than 10 years, coming to Sonoma, seeing the evolution, seeing, like David mentioned, the downturn and the upturn, sharing in the sentiment of, traffic and parking. It's, I understand the challenges, but yeah.
Why Sonoma versus other areas?
I mean, when we looked at, the cities in Sonoma County, between Healdsburg, Santa Rosa, Petaluma, here, it fits more of what we are. We're a family-owned company. All of our relationships with the products that we bring in are with families. The growers that we work with are families. Tom, our winemaker, has been here for 30 years. We wanted to work with Steve in the county for a long time. And just the general feel of the community is more similar to our community within the company. And that's important to us. And when I became a part of the project, my pressure to the greater team was, we're going to do more for the community with having a space that's open and welcoming, providing a place for smaller producers to showcase their products, whether it's knives or wine or farms or local artisans, rather than just, we've seen what's happened with the tasting rooms on the square. They've shortened their hours. They're only open certain days, and these beautiful buildings are sitting empty, really just because of saturation. And with that corner piece of the plaza, we also have to be a beacon. We need to make sure that we're a bright spot and a positive spot for the community to hang out, to follow through. And to Steve's point, hiring local we want to bring in people that create relationships. A lot of people come to one tasting room and they show up and go once, you know, or if you're not local serving, why would we go in and enjoy it? So, you know, seeing kind of the trials and tribulations that we've had in St. Helena, where we're not serving the community, having something that's a little bit more positive, a little bit more community serving is our goal.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Couple questions. And this is regarding your experience with restaurants.
Yeah.
I'm curious, historically, if, what is the, and this may not be a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the frequency in which you max out seats?
I wish we could understand that. You know, I think in most people would kind of dictate this in the restaurant industry. During a Warriors playoff game, we know that we're going to either be high or low. You never know. I mean, there could be a green light in Winters, and then, you know, there's 40 cars here. For us to be able to dictate volume is virtually impossible. I mean, you know, Tuesday nights, we know we're going to have a lot of people on the square, and does that mean we're going to have a lot of people come through? I don't know. But we want to be prepared, and in the 10 employees is kind of that that sweet spot for us. There's going to be a lot of times where it's going to be 5, and there's going to be a lot of times where if we have to stay in or stay late, or somebody wants to do their graduation party upstairs, we're going to have a couple more people. But I can't imagine ever having more than 12 or 15, and that would be for really dialed in service. So,
As a follow-up,
sure.
in terms of floor plan layout,
Mm-hmm.
did you max the seats based upon floor configuration? Is this necessary in order to be a successful model, or is it possible, given the very apparent concern expressed by many about parking and not really knowing and hearing the 64 seats and envisioning that and multiplying it and so on. So I'm curious on what drove that, if it was just simply maxed out?
You know, in conversation with Steve and like looking at space, you know, there's several constraints that we're looking at with walkways and seats pulling in and out and design and retail space and what we can do for access to that. That was about the maximum we could fit in there. Do I foresee us? I mean, I'd love to say that we'll have 64 people sitting at once. I mean, that would be great for business. But I think a lot of time we're going to be working on an overflow kind of basis. You know, like, do we need to have the upstairs bar running? Do we need to have the lounge going? And so I think that larger 64-seat impact is the number that we see fit for maximum. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have another question. As an operator of this restaurant, do you have any concerns about our parking problem and the fact that locals stay away from the plaza on the weekends, that there might not be enough parking available for your patrons? I mean, do you have concerns about that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think most of the cities in both counties in their downtown areas have those concerns. I think Napa's a little bit, they've got a better opportunity with the garages and with those things, and if we're able to use these public spaces from the state, I think it's going to help everyone. And it bothers me that we're not going to be able to have our own community members on the weekends. But what we hope to do with that is you know, you see where the traffic patterns, like, you know, in the time frames, like if you go between 7 and 11, there's tons of parking spaces open, right? And it's those kind of cramped periods where, you know, where do we see things happening? And in our business plans with the kind of local serving things that we want to do, we feel like a lot of our business is going to be in those interim periods. And when the people that are parking in these spots downtown, whether they're visitors or locals alike, we hope that our bright spot on the plaza brings a little bit, different foot traffic. So it's not just localized to certain areas and, bringing it around the corner to Cy and our neighbors and bringing it over to some of the other businesses and the pottery shop. And, that's what we hope to do. Because, it is, like, if you look at the square, you see the hot zones of people, right, and where they're standing. And we want to kind of, like, hopefully balance that out. So.
I have a question about the takeout and providing goods, like prepackaged foods. What percentage of your business do you think you're looking at in terms of that type of volume?
Well, if we do a good job of making stuff that people in town like, I see it increasing and doing a good job. And we kind of talk about this internally. There's a lot of opportunity for that. For quality takeout food that's inexpensive in town, we hope it's a large portion of our morning business, a large portion of our lunch business, and also a large portion of our, say, workers downtown that are leaving kind of the traditional 9-to-5 jobs, picking stuff up and taking it home. So, to your point, I think any way we can get involved in adding a spot for people to get in and out would benefit our business.
And do you see a lot of the takeout kind of like a symbiotic relationship with the plaza and sitting outside?
We hope so.
Kind of that
we hope so.
idea?
Yeah, we hope so. Anything that we can do to make the plaza more vibrant and more utilized in a positive manner, we want to do that. Is that with food? Yeah. Is it with energy? Yeah. Is it with getting people just around the corner to see the next few businesses? Yeah. And is food a part of it? We hope so.
And my last question has to do with the lack of a breakfast place on the plaza
Yeah.
and a morning eatery. And so do you see that as also being a focus of your business? Because you're going to be opening up at 8 a.m., so I assume that you'll have like some sort of like a breakfast food or maybe the ability to have breakfast meals.
Right. Yeah. That's always been we have like our brand book and some of the stuff that we had originally come up with in the concept last fall when we stepped back and looked at it, like what is going to be the best for the space, for the community, for us, and fun. Like, having a breakfast spot, it's tough and in the mornings. And we talk about this too. Is 8 too late to start? And we feel like with the seasonality and the changes in sun and all that stuff that we have up here, 8's the best spot. It's kind of the sweet spot to start. And who knows? We could be running breakfast even later, depending on how successful it is. And having the full kitchen allows us to have a greater spectrum of what we do, having a better opportunity to make it seasonal, have a better opportunity to make it good and less costly.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
One more?
This is just an informational question. I noticed on the drawing that the balcony is inaccessible.
Yeah.
It just seems like, I don't know much about it, but it seems like a nice amenity. Can't use that, huh?
No, structurally, and Steve can probably talk better to it, but it's not structurally sound. It's a beautiful addition. It would be nice to kind of bring some energy with that balcony. Obviously, it's an unfortunate, probably increase our insurance a little bit, but I think what we plan to do, and you've seen it in kind of the brand plans, is bring some life to it with planting, bring some life to it with cleaning it and painting it.
I assume you would be using that if you could. So
we would if we could. Yeah. Yeah. So you've seen the building now in its current state. The windows are pretty old. Probably, some of them are from the 60s and some of them are from the 80s. And the windows upstairs are currently these shortened kind of sliding glass doors, right? What we want to do is the front windows facing the square, there'll be the nano windows that can open all the way open. So on nights that the weather's great, or even if it's a little bit chilly and we want to give you a blanket, kind of that inside-outside feel, and open it up to the square so you can kind of, unfortunately, hear the trucks, but feel the energy of the square. And I think that's a part of it. That breeze, the warmth, or the humidity from the fog rolling in. I think that's all part of that kind of collective California feel that we want with the space upstairs.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions, okay? And you know that I met with your team,
Yeah.
okay, yesterday, and one of the things that really hit me was that this was going to be a local, family-operated restaurant,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
But you are not local per se, correct?
No, I wasn't born in Sonoma, and I live
Okay,
in
so
Sonoma.
who's actually the operator, and are those representatives here to speak?
No. I mean, we haven't. Yeah, Tom, our winemaker. He's Santa Rosa, been here for a long time. We're looking to hire local. We want
But the
somebody.
Taub family, who
The-
is supposed to operate the restaurant, is not present this evening?
No. So I'm managing the project and going to be managing things going forward. They're my boss.
So the operation of the restaurant and the food and so forth and how it's presented to the public
Will be run from the restaurant.
by you,
Yeah.
correct?
Correct.
Okay. Second question, on the balcony, to
Yeah.
follow up on fellow commissioners' comments
Yeah.
Or questions. My understanding is that the balcony is not, or cannot be accessible because the cost of retrofitting it for it to be accessible is excessive. Is that correct?
We would literally have to remove the entire balcony and that roof to redevelop it. Basically, taking Steve could better comment on the structure.
Hi, Steve Martin. The balcony actually was never designed for assembly loading.
It was never, forgive me, I'm sorry?
It was never designed for what's called assembly loading, which is the type of loading you have on a balcony. 60 pounds per square foot, if you're wondering what exactly it is. But so it was never designed for that. It was really designed as an aesthetic addition to the building. We joked, I think, yesterday about maybe on the lease renewal, we'd design a proper balcony out there that would meet the current code. But it wasn't historically a accessible balcony. As a matter of fact, there's not even a doorway that goes out onto it. You have to step over a window ledge to get out there.
Okay, thank you. I think with that, there's no further questions of the applicant. We will open up the public hearing to the rest of the general public, and I would ask people, if you care to comment, please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Approach the podium and state your name and address.
Sarah Sturch, 511 Oregon Street. First, I'm reading a statement from Christy Bowe, who's at 2347 South Central Avenue. She can't be with us tonight, and she is disabled, and she utilizes a wheelchair. Quote, allowing this project to move forward without appropriate ADA access to the upper floor is a huge mistake, but one that is easily rectified. The family has the opportunity and the resources to update this building to benefit all of Sonoma while appreciating its historical integrity. If they choose not to do so, it will further reinforce the belief that this is an out-of-town, large-scale importer who is only looking out for their bottom line with a vanity project and not for the community at its best interest. Through the submission process, it seems like a classic bait and switch. Quote, it is often easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask permission. If the applicants are allowed to proceed with this widely different concept, we should hold them to the appropriate standards and make it available to all patrons and not marginalizing a certain sector due to the expense of one piece of equipment. The plan clearly states the space and necessity of a dumb waiter. To change that space to a single ADA-compliant elevator is not logistically dissimilar. They seem to place a higher priority on moving food as opposed to moving patrons. If Sonoma is going to do this, it needs to be done the right way and with the right intentions with all of the community in mind. And Christie is asking for a postponement to consider accessibility. And my statement, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, makes it possible for everyone with a disability to live a life of freedom and equality. The ADA protects the rights of people with disabilities in all aspects of employment and accessing public services such as transportation, private establishments, restaurants, stores, hotels, etc. As of 2018, according to the Sonoma County Department of Health Services, 6%, an estimated 660 Sonoma residents, have an ambulatory disability, meaning they have serious difficulty walking or climbing stairs. Of those adults 75 years or older in Sonoma, 1 in 2 have an ambulatory disability. That's a large portion of our population. Additionally, 6.5% of those community members are millennials, the top target demographic for wine and spirits producers right now. That might sound like small potatoes to you, but they add up, especially in a small town like Sonoma, where word travels fast and travel for all people is touted by the Sonoma Valley Visitors Bureau in their advertisements. I'm disappointed there'll be no ADA accessibility on the second floor. It's a civil rights law, and it's quite a shame. As a regular to the plaza, and a wine and spirits enthusiast and journalist, I won't be able to enjoy your upstairs space with my friends who have ambulatory disabilities, including those who work in the beverage industry. My friends will be served downstairs in a dining room or retail space, unable to experience the wine and spirits lounge as touted in the proposal. That includes my family, who might have bad knees and common challenges that many of us might experience one day. A dumb waiter is going to be installed, and again, it's more about moving food rather than people. I also hope you'll consider serving as much Sonoma wine as possible, because I know you make about a handful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. Robert Demler, 649 First Street West. I'm about a block and a half from the site of this proposal, and I think it's a great proposal. I like it a lot, and I would be a frequent visitor to the space. My concern is parking in a larger sense than just for this applicant, although I think the applicant could be involved. This commission decided to fund a non-existent account for parking with a former applicant across the plaza. I know that this applicant meets the code. The code seems to me to be very outdated, and it's very, to me, unfair to others on the plaza for one owner having to pay to this non-existent fund and others not. It would be a chance for this applicant to contribute to that non-existent fund, because we're going to have parking issues going forward, and they're not going to get any easier. If we do get the parking behind the barracks, it needs to be rejigged. That's going to cost money. If we don't get it, we need to think of other locations. But I would urge you to have discussions with this applicant about contributing to that fund. Otherwise, I think this is a very fine product that would be well received. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone else?
Good evening. I'm Dan Araldi, and been on the plaza since 1922, and in our current location since 1958. We've seen many changes, and what I'm worried about is we're always changing the use of a building. So the wine tasting room, I think that was fine because you might have 4 people working. But in a restaurant, they claim they're going to have 10 people, but I don't know if that number includes the people behind the bar and the retail and everything else. And the city doesn't require parking for employees in their formula for coming up with parking spaces needed. When I come to work in the morning at 9 o'clock, I would say 25% of the parking spaces are taken by people working on the plaza. They park right in front of my building. all down the street, everywhere. And if we keep intensifying the use of the building and impacting the parking, it's going to hurt everybody's business, because there's not a business on the square that doesn't depend on locals. 50% of my business is local. It used to be 100%. But I have so many locals that don't come in anymore because they say, I can't deal with the parking. They don't even come to the square. And I'm worried about changing the feel of the plaza by having problems with the parking. This isn't just the only project. We have the cheese factory that has been approved, it's being appealed, but it's my understanding they didn't have to provide parking. And I heard David say earlier tonight that if a building is completely redone, that they have to meet the new codes, the codes that are on the book. Well, I don't think that was ever happened in such a way. And so I think we got to worry about the cumulative effect of changing and intensifying the use of all the buildings as they come up without worrying about where we're putting the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
See, before I begin, let me. Before I start, if you'd like some history on where this ordinance, the 300 square feet, I'd be happy to give you some information without using my 3 minutes.
I would like to hear. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Without, yeah.
We'll give you, how much time do you need for this history
Oh, I don't know, a
lesson?
couple of minutes, that's all
Okay.
it'll take to do that. Vic Conforti, 755 Broadway. This ordinance of trying to find a fair way of dealing with the merchants around the plaza who use plaza parking came about as a way of recognizing that the minimum use for these buildings would be a retail use and office use. And those ratios are both the same. They're both one car space per 300 square feet of use. The restaurants and the other higher use businesses on the plaza were essentially given the recognition of being grandfathered, or however you want to put it. And it isn't written with quite as there's a subtle difference between the simple concept of 1 per 300. It's written that no change of use would exceed that number. So when there is a change of use, you have to tally up every part of the building, whatever use it's put to. If it's, some of it is retail, some of it is a bar, or some of it is a restaurant. You tally all that up, and it cannot exceed this so-called credit. But there's a subtle difference there. It allows people to do anything they would like, as long as they don't exceed that number. And that was the goal and the purpose of the creation of that section in the section F, and that's part of the parking ordinance. So, great, thank you. I guess you received my comments through email, I believe, and So you probably have those in front of you. I'm not going to labor those. I did want to bring up the kind of a general question about your ability or your responsibility to review uses that are before you with a use permit. It's not the same as just applying code sections. If someone wants to build a restaurant on West Napa Street down past 5th Street, and they wouldn't even come before you. If they meet all the development code standards, parking, setbacks, coverage, floor area ratio, they probably wouldn't even be here, because some of those zones, being commercial zones, permit that by right. So when something is brought to you, it's in this situation, it's either in a historical zone or there's specifically, like around the plaza, restaurant uses. You have the discretion to do more than the minimum or maximum or whatever it is. You don't have to be locked into that. The parking ordinance, as you know, includes various ratios, and in the restaurant section it doesn't include employees, but it doesn't exclude them either. It's silent on that. There are other, as I pointed out in the comments I sent you earlier, there are plenty of other instances. Hotels have a straightforward 1 car per room, and then they add employees to that. Medical buildings have a ratio per square foot, like other uses, and then they add employees to it. Even guest facilities for elderly have a similar thing. So that it is, if you think that there should be an employee, a reasonable requirement would be to add employees to the 1 per 300 or 1 for 4 seats or any of these things. You have the ability to do that. So I would hope you would do that, because I think there is an employee issue here, and Dan is under pressure, and it's getting more and more severe. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Anyone else care to speak?
I will. My name is Tom Hind. I live at 181 Yalupus Circle in Santa Rosa. Was a Sonoma resident many years ago for 4 years before I moved to Santa Rosa. Very happy Araldi shopper for many years. I'm the winemaker for Taub Family Vineyards. The Taub family is a 3rd generation producer, importer, distributor of wines that's a pleasure to work for. We started Heritance Vintners in 2012. We produce 35,000 cases of Sonoma wines. We produce wines off the Lawler Road Vineyard that we designate from Sonoma. We produce wines from the Sonoma Coast, the Russian River Valley. We make a Zinfandel from Dry Creek Valley. We make 4 distinct wine brands. Heritance is our Napa estate. Au Contraire Cellars is our Sonoma estate. We do a Zin called Angry Bunch. It's kind of fun. You're going to enjoy that wine immensely. And we've been looking for the last 5 years for a place to do our consumer-facing tasting, hospitality, visitor type of center. And we're very fortunate to have decided on Sonoma Square. It's traditional to me, and it's a great place to do Sonoma wine and food. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment, bring it back to the commission for discussion, and David, did you want to comment on something before we go ahead?
Yes.
Could I
well,
respectfully request to keep it open to respond to a couple of those comments?
Only if we have questions from the commission. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to say that any new restaurant is subject to use permit review by the Planning Commission regardless of where it's located within city limits. As a use permit review, the Planning Commission's job is to evaluate projects on a case-by-case basis in terms of their compatibility. If you felt that this project had some unique issue with respect to parking, then that can certainly be part of your consideration and decision-making process. That's a fact. But I would just like to highlight the counter alternative, the alternative of this project not even coming before the Planning Commission. This project, or this site, because tenant improvements had started, is exempt from the wine tasting moratorium. It's easy to imagine a scenario in which the applicants had simply chosen to pursue that. Under the parking standards established by the City Council recently with respect to wine tasting facilities, they're treated just as retail. So there's no limitation on the number of seats that such a facility could have. Presumably would have more than what's proposed now because there would be no kitchen. Possibly would have fewer employees. Possibly the upstairs would remain rented out to a variety of office uses. Those too have tenants, and some of them, employees. Some of them may not have a lot. Some of them might. There's no way to calculate that. There's no way to regulate that because it's a use by right and it doesn't come in front of you. The reason why the planning staff did not make any special findings with respect to the parking requirement associated with this use is because we believe that in terms of employee parking, it's not unique. It will operate as any other restaurant would in the plaza, and the amount of seating that's proposed is consistent with the 1 space per 300 limitation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So I'm open for discussion from commission.
Can I ask a question? I would like to hear the applicant respond to any questions that he had and let anyone else also do so, because I think it's important that we have this interactive sort of exchange so that we know what everybody has to say.
I am not going to open it up to a full dialogue back and forth between the public and the commission. We've given the public an opportunity to speak. If you have specific questions for the applicant for something that has been raised by the public, you may ask the applicant that question. But I do not want to start a dialogue between the applicant and the public and the commission all in one fell swoop. So.
The applicant indicated that he wanted to respond to a couple of comments that were made from the public, by members of the public. That's the only thing I was asking for.
I understand that, but unless there's something that the public has raised that is a concern to somebody on the commission where you want the applicant to address it, we won't pursue it.
I have a question for staff. Is that all right?
Yeah.
My first question is, can you address the concerns about ADA requirements that were brought up by a member of the public? Is that something that we need to consider, or is that under our purview? Is that the building department?
Well, the ADA requirements are administered through the building department, and I would note that they were involved in early on in preliminary review of this restaurant proposal, and that was a key question that I personally in the planning department wanted to know the answer about. Is a elevator required for this restaurant use with the 2 floors? And the building official indicated that provided there is equal services, equivalent services on each floor, that then an elevator would not be required. And so the model that has been essentially developed by the applicant is intended to provide that equivalent services on both floors. The only difference would be on the first floor, you would only have retail. So it's my understanding from this preliminary review that they've addressed that issue. And if they submit plans after, given if this is approved, if they were to submit building permit plans that did not meet the 80 requirements, it wouldn't be, a building permit would not be approved for it.
Great, thank you. And my second question is, and just to go back to the ADA real quick, even if the building department did approve it and someone out in the community found that it wasn't in compliance, they would have a legal issue. And so it would be in their interest to make sure that everything was...
There are legal remedies associated with pursuing that issue.
And then I was actually just curious, based on the conversations we've had recently, why this has already gone to design review.
Because it got bumped. Thank you.
Wasn't there an issue of demolition as well?
No.
The application was initially scheduled for Planning Commission consideration. It got bumped from a regular meeting to accommodate review of a larger project. Since there was no movement forward on any of these exterior alterations in terms of building permits, we felt that it was allowable to let them go before the Design Review Commission for these exterior modifications ahead of the Planning Commission review.
But we haven't obviously issued any permits for any interior improvements.
Okay, thank you.
So we're open for discussion from the commission.
I'll start. A lot of talk about parking, and I know it's been a major topic for every project, and I just, maybe my perspective might be considered warped by some, but I've heard a lot of people talk about this intensification of use. I've heard no expert testimony that supports that. I don't know under what auspices or what authority someone says this is an intensification of use. According to our code, it's an equivalent use. Some have said our code is outdated. I think it might be because it didn't take into account ride sharing. It didn't take into account an increased use of bicycles. It didn't take into account a lot of things. So again, I don't know where the expert testimonies come from that says this is an intensification of use. If someone has that data, has that information, I would be happy to hear it. But I don't see it as being that. In fact, if I looked at that building as an office building and a bank in 1920, in 1930, in 1950, and 1960, I'm going to guess there was probably more like 20, 25 employees, not 10. So if employee parking is a concern, I think we're actually going to have less employees.
Population of Sonoma was 900 too.
So, in fact, in the most recent use, the IT had their offices upstairs. I think they had more than 10 employees up there. Plus, there was also a retail component on the ground floor that probably had 2 to 3 employees. So these look like equivalencies to me. They don't look like an intensification of use. Also, I think Mr. Demler made the comment about if we don't get the Casa Grande parking lot. Well, all we're talking about here is a negotiation with the state. The lot's not going to go away if the city doesn't negotiate. It just might mean there's a slight change in how it's managed and used. But that parking will still be there. So no parking is going away if we don't negotiate a lease with the state. And I just, it seems to me people are dredging and looking for something when there's nothing there. Again, unless I hear something different, I am prepared at this point to say I would like to put a motion forward to approve the project as submitted because I think it complies with our existing code.
You are welcome to make that motion
I-
now,
I
and we
have-
can
I-
still continue
Sure,
discussion, so.
certainly, yeah, no, but I just, I don't see the, it seems to me that, based on staff report, based on what I've seen, that we're not talking about a major change in use in this project. So, yes, I would like to move that we approve the project as submitted.
Is there a second for that?
I'd like to second that motion.
Okay. So we can continue discussion on the motion on the floor then. Anyone else care to join in?
Well, are we going to do the traditional discussion by rotation? Or are we voting on?
We don't have
Because I would like to
tradition.
offer some comments.
It's a wide open discussion at this point with a motion on the floor.
Okay, well, I will offer my comments, the traditional format. There's a lot to like about this project. I could see myself availing the breakfast options. I think there are a lot of things to like about this project. I think from the renderings I've seen and the narrative, it seems to be well thought out and well put together. So I don't have a real issue with the use. My general concerns are there are a few concerns. One, I understand that it seems like everyone now just wants to do a restaurant or wine tasting on the plaza. I think we will regret losing second floor office space. I think, and this is just a general comment, this has nothing to do with this project in particular, but I think that Sonoma makes a mistake when we just double down on this type of use on the plaza. I think, 15 or so years ago, this used to have, the whole second floor was winebusiness.com, and I think Sonoma would be smart to really try to economically develop other types of businesses. And those types of businesses, maybe a small tech company, a small a business of that nature, would love, I think, a second floor office on the plaza. And so, again, that's not what we have before us, but I think in general we need to be a little smarter about the types of uses we have on our plaza, and in terms of diversity, and mix them up. In terms of that said, if it's not going to be that, I do prefer the idea of this use to just a tasting room. But I do think there are parking concerns. I think, I don't know if I've heard expert testimony, but I think it's just common sense that a restaurant running from 8 a.m. to midnight at this location will be an intensification of use that is currently there. I think with second floor office, ground floor retail, and we talk about effective parking on the plaza, there's a general, and I think this is probably part of the thought process that went into our current code. There's shared parking, basically. During the day, office and retail will take the places, the parking. At night, the parking will be sort of taken by restaurants. And so we have a restaurant now basically, taking that parking all day. And in my view, I'm not an expert, but I live here and I understand how things actually work on the plaza. I think that will be a more intense use during the day than what's currently there, and will add more use at night than what is currently there. I think when it comes to parking in the code, it does follow the code. You get 16 spaces and you are asking for 16 spaces, and so that does follow the code. I do think the greater problem, and we're in the process of addressing this, is that our code, especially for restaurant use, is, I don't know if it's outdated, I just don't think it's accurate. I think, you're gonna have you're gonna have a lot of employees here, et cetera, and I don't think that the code takes into account the parking demand restaurants have on the plaza. And, you see, whether it's medical offices or hotels or many other uses, they call out specific employee parking, and we don't do that. And maybe we wouldn't have to if we had a parking district or we had available parking around the plaza, but as we all know, we don't. It's a tough one for me because I do like the concept and the idea of it. I just think that there are some parking issues, and I would like to, and ultimately it comes down to approve a use permit, as David said earlier. We have to make findings. We have to make 4 findings, and as I'm sure we're all aware. And the first one is this consistent with the general plan? I would say it is. The second one is, does the proposed use comply with all applicable standards and regulations of the development code? And as I just said, I believe in the parking it does. Whether you believe the code or not, that's not the issue, it does. And then the fourth is the proposed use will not impair the architectural integrity and character of the zoning district, and that already occurred a long time ago when they devastated the building. So no, it won't. So the one issue that I would just like to hear the rest of the Planning Commission, I would like to hear the rest of the Planning Commission's views on the third finding that we have to make. The operating characteristics of the proposed use are compatible with the existing and future land uses in the vicinity. And so that just basically comes down to, is a restaurant here with a perceived more intense use and a larger parking demand on a corner that has no parking on Napa Street, or no, it does have parking on Napa Street, but it's parallel. Is that compatible with the existing land uses, Araldi's, the Harvest Moon, which we got a letter from, the potentially future hotel across the street that will probably impact that area, and that's the future land uses in the vicinity. And I'm just curious if we can make that finding, and I'm open to making that finding, but I struggle with that finding. And those are my comments. Thank you.
I've met twice with the applicant, and I think I got a pretty full description of what's going to go on in there. And I also went down and viewed the construction site the other day. I think the project concept is a good one for the square. It offers some variety in the hours and the kind of meals being served, breakfast late at night. I think that could be an adjunct to the square. The offerings are already on the square. What I really see as the issue is what has been mentioned several times before, and that is that our parking on the square ordinance is really out of date, and that is the real issue I see. Additionally, it's been mentioned about the restaurant parking analysis and requirement. That is also out of date. But it's not out of date. But this project has been submitted based on the existing parking regulations, the development code, which I think it meets. The idea that we have 16 parking spaces credit on the square makes no sense at all. I think we all know that. There's no parking, there are none available, and there's 16 credits, so it works. This applicant went into the process under those rules and regulations and was advised by the planning staff correctly that it fits. So I have a real issue. I have tension here about this decision, frankly. It seems like, to me, like land use law would allow someone to go in and meet the code and have this project go ahead. On the other hand, Commissioner Barnett has brought up an issue in the conditions. Is this, it's a subjective thing. Does this fit in land use in terms of the apparent increase in activity that's going to cause in parking and traffic? And that is not quite as objective as the development code formula which this applicant meets. So I'd like to hear more about what people have to say, but I'm very conflicted over this issue right now. In terms of following the rule that's in front of me and pretty clear, this project should be approved. I think it's a good project, and I think they've met the code, but I'm still wrestling with this idea of the impact on the square. Thank you.
Yes, I have I have comments, a number of comments, okay? I think that, and I do agree, by the way, with the motion and the second, okay? I think it does fit all the regulations and everything. I do have, however, concerns as Commissioner Barnett and Commissioner Jim, forgive me, okay? Bobar? Did I say it correctly? Okay. And that I do have concerns about the fact that we cannot address parking on each individual use that comes into the square. We just can't do it on an individual use. It has to be done in a much more concerted effort. It takes some real top-down kind of people to deal with that. It takes the city, who has the most vested interest in terms of revenues, okay, from property taxes and retail sales taxes and so forth that come into the city. It takes the Chamber of Commerce and the Visitors Bureau, who promote tourism, okay? Whether or not this particular restaurant is aimed at tourism is not the point. The point is that that's what has to happen, and it does get down to the number of employees. It really is down to the number of employees. Restaurants do have more employees traditionally than other uses. However, if you had an upstairs office, as Commissioner Barnett had suggested, which I think is a really great idea, okay? If you had that, however, you would also have a number of employees. Bottom line is, you've got to address it in a broad way, and you have to really aim back at the people who benefit the most, and that's the city, that's the owners, and that's the long-term lessees. They're the ones that make the money out of all of this. And we can't hold to, we can't hold any one particular use, from my perspective, hostage to the fact that they can't solve all of the parking issues. And I don't consider it a problem per se, I consider it an issue. If it were a problem, the problem would be having fewer people come in to fill the spaces than not, okay? That's the benefit of having a popular downtown, which we have. So I think that we need to put this all into perspective. The use per se, I think it's great, okay? I'd love to have seen somebody who's actually going to be a part of the Taub family running the restaurant, which is what I was told was going to happen, be a representative of that, talk a little bit more about the kind of restaurant it was going to be or is supposed to be. That would have been a very positive feature, okay? Then the other thing is that, let's see, we are talking about the possibility of development code changes, which might solve this parking issue. It's not going to. It's going to be a real bottom-up, roll-up-your-sleeves kind of thing, I believe, personally, okay, that we have to deal with property owners, with the city, and so forth. And I don't think that we can do it with changes in the development code, general plan updates, or any of those things that normally we look forward to. We'd put a virtual moratorium on changes of use in the plaza area, in the downtown area, if we waited for all of those things to happen. It's just gonna take a long time for those things to happen. I think right now, what we've got to do is look at each use on an individual basis. And so for that reason, I will support it, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to add something to the conversation that we've had right now in my past comments. There's been a lot of magical, with all respect to people in this room and the commission and the staff, I think there's been a lot of magical thinking about parking opportunities and ways to jiggle the parking opportunities in this town. And the problem is being kicked, the can is being kicked down the street, and I can't say that it's being kicked down the street by the Planning Commission because it's not our purview to develop parking opportunities. I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but I'm concerned that we aren't able to make a public notice that we are changing I think we're changing the interpretation of the parking requirements. We're talking about that tonight. Yet people have relied on those regulations and moved ahead to this point with this project. And it seems to me that the city, whomever is responsible for developing the parking solutions, that needs to go public, that in fact we're going to hold up development until we come up with those solutions, or that there is a solution in process, and here are the temporary impacts of it, because I am very concerned that we're rejiggering the regulations and people haven't been forewarned about that, and I think they deserve to be forewarned about it. And I'm inclined to want to support this project, but I'm not in favor of continuing through this same process without authoritative notice that we are going to hold up development, delay it, modify it, and that we in fact do have a parking solution. I know that's pretty bold talk, but I don't think we want to go through this kind of exercise again if there's a solution to that.
Well, I made the second to move forward with the project, but I also want to provide my comments and rationale for why I support the project. One of the main reasons is I think that this is a far superior and better use than what was originally approved. It's a use that will be better for the downtown. It will revitalize the corner, and it provides variety and options that in some instances don't exist or don't exist quite enough on the plaza. This is what makes a downtown better. This is what makes a commercial district better. This is what cities and downtowns are desiring. So, you know, I truly believe that this is a better use. The building's not any square footage. It's complying with our existing parking codes and standards, and I am also looking forward to, with the commission and also with the council, to discuss and have dialogue about the future of parking in the downtown. This may not necessarily be the case a year or 2 years from now with respect to how we're evaluating parking. So, but we have an applicant that's before us and an existing parking code, and so we have to be fair and rational in our decision and making land use decisions based on what we have. There also is one of my comments about the operational characteristics of the building and the use. It is a little bit different than some on the plaza in that it does have takeout, and one of the things that they are going to be striving is to be thoughtful in trying to provide goods and services that people can take away with them. And so one of the things that I thought our commission could consider in their discussion is possibly making a recommendation and a condition to require that the traffic committee look at possibly a short or limited term parking space somewhere in proximity that could make that use more viable and that feature more viable. But again, I also am very concerned about ADA compliance, but I also have to rely on our building department and our building official to make those final decisions. And that doesn't change the complexion or the actual use that's before us. Whether it's an office use or a restaurant use, and it's being looked at in terms of a renovation of both floors. So I really believe that the building official has the final decision on that, not us. So otherwise, I do believe that we can make the findings that it's consistent with the general plan, the standards that we have within our zoning code in our downtown, and there's no substantial changes to the exterior of the building that warrant concern, and the operational characteristics are compatible with a vibrant mixed-use downtown that supports restaurants, offices, and retail, and uses that provide something better than a static wine tasting shop or room. So those are my comments.
I'm leaning to also support this project for a variety of reasons. I believe that the project as presented is going to breathe some new life in a corner that has appeared rather stagnant for, in my interpretation, for quite a few years. And as you drive by on West Napa Street heading west, it seemed to be almost like a blank wall. So in that sense, I welcome this this project to breathe some new life into it. As my fellow commissioner just stated, I too have some concerns about ADA. The word family has been expressed a lot this evening about what the Taub family speaks to, stands for, etc. And I am not going to step in and pretend I'm a building department inspector and try to come up with a legal interpretation or the requirement or no requirement for an elevator. But I really think I'd like to ask the applicant to look hard within to say, you know, why not? Why not go ahead and spend some extra money? Because I don't think money is the total driving behind this project, because the way it has been detailed and presented as something that is going to be of quality. So I would strongly encourage the applicant to look within and give consideration to creating truly equal access. Because the good news is for most of us, we don't have to deal with it yet. So that's one comment. I also would love, and this may be a strange comment, but I think there was a public comment about the reality that we have to address parking, and that it may be behoove various applicants, successful applicants, to be able to contribute to a fund that can be, again, be able to address what is a very pressing need. I do not embrace the expectation that more people will be coming to Sonoma because of the Taub family outpost. I believe that the Taub family outpost will be another choice for visitors that are already here or coming to Sonoma. I conclude my comments by just simply summarizing by saying that I am supportive of this project.
Thank you. I share a number of the concerns that have been raised by the commission tonight, but I also think that what we have before us is a good project. I think it provides some variety, even though it's a restaurant use. It does add a different spin to the kind of restaurant use that we currently have on the plaza. And while I absolutely share the concern with the situation with parking, this is not something that we can lay on this applicant in this situation to solve, because as the code is written, and he is complying with the parking requirement, and so I can't dismiss the project because of parking. It doesn't mean that the parking situation is ideal or is going to go away in any time soon, but it is the bigger picture, and unless we would literally call for a moratorium on any future projects around the plaza, which would require us to go to the city council to ask for that, I don't see that happening either. I think we have to deal with what we've got in front of us, and we have to deal with the problems or concerns that we've got with issues like parking in the broader term. And so at this point, I think this project is as I said, a good project, so I am in support of it. Even though I have reservations on some of the impacts it might have, I think that I can easily support the findings that are necessary to approve a use permit. So with that, I'm going to call the questions and ask for a roll call vote on the motion before us, which is to approve the project as submitted.
Chair Felder, can I amend my?
Well, if you're going to amend it for a parking situation, I would ask you to make that as a recommendation for the traffic committee to consider it, but I don't think we should attach that as a condition of approval.
Okay.
So after we vote on the motion, if you want to make a recommendation to forward that to the traffic committee.
That sounds good. Thank you.
With that, call the question.
Commissioner Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Jansen.
Aye.
Commissioner Willander.
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar.
Aye.
Commissioner McDonald.
Aye.
Commissioner Cribb.
Aye.
And Commissioner Corrado.
She doesn't
Oh,
vote on
excuse
this
me.
one.
Chair Felder.
Aye.
The
So
motion
with that,
was-
we have a motion that carries 7-0. Congratulations to the applicants, and I hope that you will take into account some of the considerations that were discussed tonight, even though they don't limit you on going forward with the project. Anything that you can do to help us with solving parking, or if there's anything you can do for ADA accessibility that would improve your project for that element of the population, we would appreciate that. You may make a comment.
I just have a suggestion. Personally, I think there's a very good market in our town for high-quality carryout food that could be delivered. I think that's an untapped market around here, and I think you look around in San Francisco, New York, most of the urban areas are really thriving on high-quality meal delivery service. It's been in New York a long time, now it's spreading around the country. I think it could be a good adjunct to what you're doing down there if you're going to have the carry-out kind of food going on all the time.
Technology-wise, we're already set to integrate that.
Yeah.
Okay,
accept
just
it.
an idea.
So with that, since the motion has been approved, I would ask Commissioner McDonald if you would like to make a recommendation then for the staff to present something to the traffic committee, go ahead and do that.
Yes, I'd like to see if staff can explore with the traffic and parking committee the idea and concept of having a time-limited loading and unloading space for visitors in an approximate location.
We will take that up with the Traffic Safety Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're going to take a 3-minute recess.
Could I say to you, I'm very happy that it was approved. I just got my backup about
We're going to reconvene the meeting, and I believe Commissioner Bohar, you need to recuse on this item due to proximity? Yes. Thank you.
Huh. Gotta watch it with me. I'll move fast.
No. No. It's all right, we'll move on to the public hearing for the application of Leslie McCowan for the use permit to allow adaptive reuse of a historic structure as a retail shop in conjunction with a residential unit and accessory dwelling unit, including the consideration of an exception to covered parking requirement on the property of 301 First Street West. And with that, if I can get Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair Felder. So this project involves several elements. First, with respect to the Cooperage building, which fronts First Street West. The ground floor of that building would be adapted as a lifestyle retail store with 1,750 square feet of display area that would curate, display, and sell unique home furnishings, clothing, artwork, fabric, and other similar items. The store would be open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. 6 days a week with an average of 2 employees per shift. The second floor, which currently contains 2 apartments, and I think it's worth noting at this point that there was an order to vacate that structure with the Napa earthquake a couple years ago, so it has been vacant and unusable since that time. So the second floor would be converted into a residence for the owners. Exterior modifications would primarily occur on the north elevation where you'd have 2 existing stairwells removed, a cantilevered balcony installed on that facade, and also a new entry porch toward the back of the structure. So the entire building would be renovated, seismically retrofitted, and provided with an automatic fire sprinkler system as well. The large wooden barn at the back of the property would be substantially renovated as well to accommodate an 850 square foot accessory dwelling unit, storage areas, and mechanical room. The structure would be lifted in order to provide a concrete foundation system. Existing window openings would be retained on the south side of the barn, and you'd have new steel glazing system on the north elevation. Skylights and solar panels are proposed for the roof. Other project elements include reconfiguring the on-site parking to provide 3 tandem spaces within the driveway for the residential use. Perimeter landscape plantings, garden areas, privacy fencing, an automatic vehicle gate, bicycle parking, and planter boxes. In addition, the existing non-historic garage would be removed. We'd like to note that no on-site parking would be provided for the commercial use, which would rely on on-street parking in nearby parking lots for customers and employees. This property is designated medium-density residential by the general plan, which is intended primarily for multifamily housing. However, under the zoning code, the adaptive reuse of historic structures involving uses not otherwise allowed through the base zoning, including limited retail, may be allowed subject to review and approval of a use permit by the Planning Commission. Both the Cooperage building and barn have been determined to be historically significant, and thus the proposed retail shop can be considered under this adaptive reuse provision. And I would back up and just point out that the residential uses are actually permitted by right under the base zoning. So that really is not part of the consideration this evening. There's a number of findings that the Planning Commission must make in order to approve an adaptive reuse, and we've listed those and gone into detail analysis of those 5 findings in the report. I think I would just summarize that in staff's view, we feel these findings can be made as the project would preserve and rehabilitate 2 historically significant buildings that are damaged and or unused and deteriorating. And also through that would be improving and preserving the historic character of the neighborhood and the larger historic district. The project doesn't raise any issues in terms of the zoning requirements, meaning setbacks, coverage, floor area ratios, and height, since it is dealing primarily with existing structures. In terms of parking, and this will sound familiar because it was discussed in the last item, this property currently has 3 on-site parking spaces. Under the same code section discussed under the previous item, but in this case, for unreinforced masonry structures like the Cooperage building, additional parking is not required for a new use unless the new use results in an increase in the square footage of the structure or an off-street parking requirement that exceeds 1 space per 300 square feet of floor area. The project does not expand the Cooperage building, and the new use on the ground floor doesn't exceed that allowable ratio. So accordingly, the project does not require any additional parking beyond the amount currently provided on site, which we have determined is 3 spaces. That is preserved through the plan, though in a reconfigured fashion. We did note that part of the proposal does involve an exception from the covered parking space. A primary residence under our parking code requires 1 covered space, and the proposal involves uncovered parking. We feel the findings for that exception can be made in general due to site conditions and in the interest of maintaining the historic character of the property. Subsequent architectural review would be necessary for this project by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. Worth noting, in terms of environmental review, this project does fit the criteria for a categorical exemption from CEQA, recognizing that the historical evaluation that's been prepared and submitted with the application confirms that the proposed work and modifications to the Cooperage and barn, which are the historically significant structures, would meet the Secretary of Interior standards with implementation of certain recommendations which have been included in the draft conditions. To go back to the parking, which I think really is a key issue in this proposal, we did note that although the existing parking baseline of 3 on-site spaces must be retained, as an unreinforced masonry structure, the Cooperage building qualifies for that parking credit equal to 1 space per every 300 square feet. That was specifically adopted by the City Council as an incentive to encourage the seismic upgrade of these types of URM buildings. And that would be accomplished through this proposal. That doesn't mean that the entire question about parking is dismissed. We have to look closely at the different uses that could be proposed. And just in that regard, David and I have sat at the table with many prospective applicants and owners of this property about various concepts for the adaptive reuse, and we've discouraged many of them because of the intensity of the use and associated parking demand, recognizing that this is largely a residential area with limited on-street parking. There's a creek on the opposite side of the street. So uses like restaurants, small hotels, wine tasting facilities, staff has discouraged in the past. The proposed use before you this evening is likely one of the least intense types of use in terms of parking that could be proposed, and also support the seismic upgrades costs to the Cooperage building. It's a fairly limited display area, and the type of retail proposed, home furnishings, unique related lifestyle items, we do not view as having necessarily a high parking demand, and feel that parking requirement generated by the use could be met by available parking in the vicinity without significantly impacting residential neighbors. And in that regard, we have tied the conditions of approval specifically to the operating characteristics of this use and how it's described in the narrative, including the type of items that would be for sale. So this is in recognition of the use permit running with the land, provided that some future change in ownership could occur. In conclusion, staff is recommending approval of both the use permit and the covered parking exception, subject to the conditions that we've attached with the report. That concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Questions of staff?
Thank you, Rob. I thought that was great. And I also thought the conditions of approval were very good in terms of the description of lifestyle retail. I have a question, and this is just sort of a general question about this parking credit with unreinforced masonry structures. It's an incentive to reinforce. And so once that's done now, will a future use, like let's say 20 years from now, a restaurant wants to move in here and you guys aren't there to discourage it, will they be able to get to use that credit because it's already been reinforced? Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the answer to that question is that that parking credit exists for an unreinforced masonry building. So say a prospective person down the road 20 years from now said, oh, I want to try for a restaurant and I want to do this math exercise and I fit within that credit. They could make that application, but it would require a use permit, of course.
I had a couple questions. One has to do with ADA parking, and I just wanted to make sure that if an ADA stall is required, that staff feels comfortable that there's enough space for that, if there's a retail component.
No ADA parking would be required if the parking is strictly for residential use, and so the proposal is that these parking spaces are strictly devoted to the residential use. So
Okay.
that gets you completely away from the entire ADA parking requirement.
That's great. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. The other thing actually has to do with the ability or to allow future uses of that space which are now proposed as retail. There's nothing that would prevent somebody, say, in the future from taking that retail space and converting it to a residential use. There wouldn't, I guess, what I wouldn't want is any sort of limitations in the future or that would discourage the reuse of that space for a residence, like with respect to parking or open space. Do you foresee any issues if that were to occur?
No, a duplex isn't a permitted use in that zoning district, and the 3 parking spaces would accommodate a duplex and the ADU on that site. So that would remain an option in the future.
Okay, and it would comply with, open space, and if that.
Yeah, it appears that a large portion of the site has been designed to accommodate open space for units, right?
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
I've got a couple, and of course they relate to parking. Furniture. I like the idea that there's going to be furniture here, but will people pick it up if they buy something, or will it be delivered?
I'm going to defer to the applicant on
Okay.
that when they make their presentation.
Okay, and then I'll save my second question for the applicant too.
Any other questions? Seeing none, would the applicant like to come forward and make a presentation? Mr. Ross.
Good evening. Excuse me while I hook up this computer. Am I switched on? Is that on yours? How about in the? Have to get rid of Xfinity first here. Hello. I'm Michael Ross, project architect for the Cooperage. And with your permission, I'd like to make a brief pictorial presentation in support of the project. Also attending tonight is Juliana Inman, the historic resource consultant who is the author of the HRE that's included in our application. And Juliana will be here to answer questions about the historic resource evaluation or the consistency of this design with that report if necessary. But to begin with, I'd like to thank the neighbors as well as the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation and the Sonoma Valley Historical Society for their willingness to meet with us and share their perspectives on this project. And we met with those groups 4 different times prior to this meeting, and I believe their input has made this a better project. This is the building that we're discussing tonight. It's one of those buildings that's part of an ensemble of buildings that are similar in Sonoma on the valley floor, made of stone. Depot Hotel, Velda Cheese, some of the buildings on the east side of the plaza, those beautiful plumstone merchant buildings, and not to mention our City Hall. I think it's a really excellent example of that masonry, and there's sort of a sense of gravitas about the building, but it's a difficult building to fathom because you rarely go inside of it. And one of the opportunities associated with making the ground floor a retail space is the public is going to be able to come and go inside of it and enjoy the very unique architecture. The building began in the 1890s as a stone building, and it didn't have this space in 1923. Basically, the apartments were built on top of it, and in 1890, it was, for all intents and purposes, a factory. It's had a number of mixed uses, but always people were living above and working below. It was truly a live-work facility, and it's had many incarnations. It's been barrel making, ice house, U.S. Navy Arms Depot. It's been Claudia Wager's watercolor gallery and studio. I believe somebody said it was a bed and breakfast at one time. But what we're seeing tonight is a presentation that continues this use. Basically, it's going to be the owner lives above and the owner's shop is below. So it's extending this pattern of use that's existed for over 100 years on this site. This is what the space looks like not so recently, around a few months ago. It's a beautiful stone, great room, really. Exposed framing above, very thick walls, and unfortunately right now the walls are riven with big gaps and ruptures from the Napa 2014 earthquake. So what does it really look like today? This is what it looks like today. The building has been very artfully stabilized by Tom Thornley and his crew at Thornley Construction, and it is being temporarily shored up, waiting for this use permit and design review and the construction process to happen to really give it another 100 years of life. And this is a costly process. And this building has the great good fortune of having a new patron who is the applicant. And her dream is to preserve this building. And it's something that she puts her heart and her art into it, and we're pleased to be part of it. This is what the proposed design is. We're proposing to remove the stucco staircase that's on the exterior of leading up to the residential unit, and also the secondary stair at the back, and replace it with one stair that you can see in this image. And where the stucco stair used to be, I'm going to back up just a few, that one, which is falling apart. We are going to cantilever a entry balcony over the side entry of the shop. And one of the reasons why we want to remove the stucco staircase is to really highlight and accentuate the stone, because the stone is one of the defining aspects of this building. And Xfinity wants to keep joining us. So Rob already showed you these images, but basically the ground floor is going to be a large open space with stone walls. There's going to be some additional columns and beams placed in there to stabilize the stone building. At the back, the barn is going to be subdivided into an accessory dwelling unit and storage. And then all along the side, on the north side, is going to be open space. And one of the reasons why we're asking for your approval of not covering the parking is because over 60% of the site right now is covered by historic buildings that can't move. And that very slender band of space on the north side of the building, should we continue to cover it, at a certain point, 75% of the space would be covered. And so in the interest of open space, light and air, and landscape, we're asking for just 3 uncovered spaces. But where will people park? Well, within a 4-minute walk of this property, there's 298 public parking spaces in 4 public lots, not counting any spaces in the plaza. And we believe that the light parking demand that the retail shop would have could be very easily handled by these spaces with 0 impact on the plaza. It's a pedestrian destination retail shop. This is what it'll look like from the air if you were a hawk. We believe it's going to be very compatible with the neighborhood. It's going to be carefully designed and lovingly refurbished. And we believe it's correct in terms of how it's being approached, in terms of extending the existing pattern of use, its neighborhood compatibility, and for the first time really opening up this beautiful architecture on the ground floor to the public in a retail environment. So that concludes this brief pictorial presentation. Juliana is here to briefly speak to the HRE, and I'm available to answer any questions should you have them, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Michael.
Good evening. I'm Juliana Inman, and I prepared the historic resource evaluation for this property. Have worked on several other significant projects in town of Sonoma, and of course in adjacent counties. I've done a lot of work on historical buildings. I am a qualified historical architect or preservation architect. But my role in this project was to review the proposed changes or alterations to the building, the restoration and rehabilitation, to see that it conforms to the Secretary of Interior's standards, so that there is no impact under the California Environmental Quality Act. I'm sure you've seen the report that I've prepared. This is, I think that this is a very significant resource for the city. It has local significance, and it features that beautiful red basalt from Shotgun Hill that was exported all over the Bay Area and built significant buildings all over the North Bay. The removal of the stairway where the balcony will be placed allows for the, reopening or the showing the original doorways that were there on that side of the building. They've been covered over by that storage area that's underneath the stairs. So my findings are that the project, as shown, and does meet the standards, and my recommendations for mitigations have been incorporated in the design. So they're already in the project that you see before you. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. We have a question.
Yeah, I'm looking at the south elevation of the barn, and I believe I read in your HRE that while it's not shown on this, you thought that there's I guess it would be the easternmost window, the fenestra, that should be left intact.
Yes, my recommendation, there are 4 windows on that elevation of the barn, and my recommendation was that they all be retained, that none of them be removed. Originally, they had wanted to, take out some windows, and I was like, no, keep
maybe
them.
Then through you, and is that being retained, Mike? Are you going to, from the?
This was late input.
Michael, can you approach the podium, please?
Sorry about that, David. Yeah.
You just need to turn your Wi-Fi off.
Oh, okay, got it.
I mean, if you took it like that.
Okay. This was late input that we received, and we'll retain those 4 windows. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions to the applicant?
I had just one question about the, I guess the access to the second unit.
Yes.
I guess that will be then refurbished back using the same stone.
Well, actually, the accessory dwelling unit is going to be in the barn. And the barn, I believe, is where the ice plant used to be located. But the accessory dwelling unit is in the barn, and there were 2 dwelling units on the second floor above the stone cooperage. That's going to become just 1 dwelling unit.
Yeah, I was referring to the access to the old second unit that's in the rear.
Yeah.
So that entrance is going to be was probably put in there after the fact.
Yes, I think it was, yeah.
So that will be restored back to its original integrity?
It's going to be, if you look at the image that's on the screen right now, there will be, that stairway is going to be replaced with a new stairway that accesses the rear deck, so that there's a back door and a front door for the unit.
But I guess maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but the access to that rear unit was kind of like an entrance that's ground level, and you kind of go up. It looks like from the original historic photo. So I was just wondering, is that facade, that portion being restored, or?
No, it's being removed.
It's being removed.
Yeah, both of the existing stairways are being removed, and it's being replaced just with 1 stair at the back.
Right, and then that wall will be restored to look consistent with.
Yes.
That was my question. Okay.
Yes, the stucco wall above will be restored, and then below the stone will show.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions to the applicant?
I have a question, or actually maybe this question is for Mr. Ross first. Will the cooperage sign be, it's in the rendering here, but will it be retained?
We want flexibility on that for a variety of reasons. That sign that you see right there is actually not the historic sign. If you go back to this image, you could see that that sign was actually directly over the windows. And so it was recreated and moved over that doorway by, I think, by Claudia. And so we don't know what the sign design is going to be at this moment because of the store brand identity and things like that hasn't been developed. So right now that will be an issue that we bring before the Design Review Commission.
So there's a possibility that if, for example, this new store with its new brand identity wants to use that sign, there's a possibility this will no longer be sort of known as the Cooperage Building. Are there sort of alternative ways to incorporate that word? I mean, and I guess my question maybe for Juliana, is there any historic significance to the signage? Is that a character defining feature?
I would say that the existing sign is too new to be historic, though it does, it was derived from the old sign. But to meet the standards, things are supposed to be 50 years old or older and relate to the period of significance of the building. So I would say that the sign is a reference to the earlier sign, but it is not in itself historic.
Okay, thank you. And this isn't even an issue that this will be a design review decision, I assume? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Ross, the owners, will they be living up there full-time? Do you know? And there's two people?
Yeah, they have another property in Sonoma.
Okay.
And this is a space for Mrs. McGowan to come when it gets too busy at their ranch, which is also a winery and a micro energy plant site that is subject to a lot of study and visitation from all around the world. And so this is sort of a place for her to be in Sonoma with the shop that she'd like to develop and curate the goods for.
Okay.
So the answer is yes. I'd say it's part-time upstairs.
Okay, that's important actually. Yeah. The ADA unit, is that going to be relegated to one person, or just one car?
Oh, that also will be lightly used, I believe. It's more like a guest house, but it's not a vacation rental. It would be maybe a caretaker of that property, something like that. I don't know how many people will be living in it.
So we don't know how many cars that may generate, correct? Because it's an unknown.
It requires one car and one parking space, and one will be provided for it.
So back to my question about the delivery of the furniture. Do you know how that's going to?
I do know.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. The furniture, should it exist, is going to be very small. Don't think that this is going to be like Bruner's or something like that.
Shucks.
Yeah. I would say that soft goods is probably a better description of what's going to be fabrics, clothing, things like that, artwork. And if furniture is going to be sold there, it's probably going to be one-of-a-kind, smaller pieces. And if that was the case, it would go out the front door.
Okay. I think that's it for now.
Anyone?
If I could follow, yeah, just because, and this maybe for you and for staff, but I thought, is this not close enough to transit where there would be no parking required for the ADU?
That's correct. An ADU in this location, and actually for probably 85% of the town, does not trigger a parking requirement.
The 3 parking spaces are required because that's the existing baseline of parking on the property, so it's not
right,
necessarily
so it's not
associated with the
ADU.
ADU.
Right, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else from the public here to speak?
Good evening. I'm Christine Bohar, and I live at 299 First Street West. Our home, a gray farmhouse, is right next to the cooperage on the north side across the 80-foot field owned by the state park. We have owned our property since 1983, during that time that Ken and Claudia Wager operated the cooperage quietly as a bed and breakfast and an art studio. My husband and I met Leslie McCowan at the site with her architect, Michael Ross, where she discussed the details of the project restoration and its planned operation. We also attended a group neighbors meeting at MacArthur Park organized by Michael Ross. Our opinion is that Mrs. McGowan is devoting substantial resources to restore this charming, unique historic property. Her plan shows good taste and judgment to create an asset that will enhance our neighborhood and its many historic properties. The conditions of approval for the permit call for limited retail activity and describes the owner's high-quality, low-intensity concept for lifestyle store. We as neighbors appreciate that this will likely create low volume of car and foot traffic and parking now and in the future. Our neighbors Dick and Carrie Fogg, who live just to the west of us, along with Jim and me, welcome the McGowan project, and as neighbors, offer our support tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion, possible action.
Juliana, it's not a question. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your material to the utmost, and I feel that you've got a fiction based on fact novel in you, and I really want to see that happen because it was fascinating reading. I don't know why, but I enjoyed it. I think this project lands softly on the ground and is perfect for the area and to revitalize the building. My questions about the tandem parking, which I really did not agree with coming into this, I think have been answered. I'm concerned that there's going to end up being parking on the street, and that really concerns me in that neighborhood. I used to live in that neighborhood temporarily. So, but if the people upstairs are part-time, I guess it's going to be a non-issue for me. But the tandem doesn't sit well with me because I know I did my research, and there's a lot of issues with tandem parking. So, except for when you've got valet parking, that's a little different. People are hired to move the cars, but with residential, it's not. So, but other than that, that's all I have to say.
Anyone else want to go?
If I could just make a comment and then a motion, I think it's a fabulous application. I think it's a treasure that everyone in Sonoma should really like. I walk by it a lot because I take my dog to the dog park down there. So the only comment that I have to make is that whatever could be preserved of the sign, I think would be positive, okay? Even though it may not be historic, it kind of defines the building to me. And but I think it's a wonderful application, and so I recommend approval of the use permit, or the exception to the parking, forgive me.
Are you making a motion?
Yes, I did.
I second.
Does that motion include the parking exception? Or?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Anyone else care to discuss it?
Well, I seconded it, and I would just like to say I think it's an excellent project. I think it's a perfect use of the space for that neighborhood. I think through the adaptive reuse provisions in the development code, that could have been a restaurant, as was discussed. It could have been a variety of different things, and I think this unique lifestyle retail store will have probably the least amount of impact for the neighborhood. The neighbors support it, and in that neighborhood, I think that really says something. So I can't say enough about this project. I think, you know, I mean, the architecture is excellent, as all of Mr. Russ's work is. I think from being on design review, I remember Ms. Inman's reports, and I always really had a lot of respect for her analysis, and I think it shows here. I think there were a few things that were really important to her and that remained in the historic resource evaluation, and that the architect and landowner decided to incorporate. So when it comes to parking, as discussed, it has a parking credit. I discussed in the earlier project that I thought the intensity of use might trigger a discussion of that. I don't think that's going to be the case for this project. So I am happy to second it.
I'd like to reiterate what my fellow commissioners have also said. I'm very happy to see this project, this proposal. It's tasteful, appropriate for the site, and fitting for the historic building. And it's refreshing to see somebody that puts such time and effort and substantial amounts of money and financial backing to support the reconstruction of a seismically challenged building. I also want to thank the applicant and staff for putting together condition number 1, specifically limiting the ground floor use and prohibiting the resale of food, because I think that clarifies everything for future owners of the building. And also, I'm supportive of tandem parking when it has to do with residential. In the future, I see housing as a real critical issue, and I would never want to see an impediment if we could get housing on a site, and the only option is tandem.
Anyone else?
I too support the project. I have admired this building probably ever since I moved here in 1985. It has looked a little frayed around the edges in the last 10, 15 years, and to now see that someone is willing to step forward and really refresh it and bring it back to its glory, I'm very pleased with. I also recognize that seismic upgrades are not inexpensive, particularly if they're done well, and that if they are done well, they should not necessarily distract from the aesthetic or the history of the building. So I'm excited to see that. I have absolutely no problem with waiving the carport requirement, because I think that would give off the wrong image for that kind of setting. And I love the fact that it's being actually cleaned up and simplified with the removal of that front staircase. So cheers to the applicant and team.
Well, I'll join in and say I'm very, very excited to see this project come forward in this form. I think it's going to be a welcome addition to the town, and so I congratulate the owner for being willing to go through this process, because it's certainly an expensive process. And so I just enthusiastically support the project, and I'm going to call for a vote. We can just do this. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
I couldn't get in there. I tried.
Motion passes 7-0. Congratulations, and we'll wait to see the project.
Thank you very much, and good evening.
Okay, and now can you find a patron for the old distillery?
So we now are moved to the rest of the agenda. We have that items for discussion item again. I don't know what that means.
Well, I figured that out, and
Okay.
it just has to do with our new agenda format and the way that the agenda is created. So, for example, at your next meeting, there's going to be a couple of discussion items.
Oh,
So that's just the heading for Planning Commission discussion items.
okay,
It's
rather
just
than a
that
public hearing.
On this agenda, we don't happen to have any.
Okay, great. So moving right along, issues update.
Well, I did want to just mention something that I stated at the last meeting, which is that the City Council did recently conduct a goal-setting session, and parking was, in the downtown area, was identified as a council goal. And in identifying that as a goal, I mean, certainly there are very broad and long-term issues that one might look at through the lens of the general plan update, which is also upcoming. But in identifying this as a goal, that the council is certainly looking at discussing short-term actions to address that issue. So I wanted to just reiterate that. Also, in terms of an upcoming council meeting, next Wednesday, the council will be giving us direction with respect to commercial cannabis activities that may or may not be allowed within the city of Sonoma. So depending on how that plays out, we would be developing code amendments that would be reviewed through the Planning Commission. And that's it.
Okay. So we're to comments from the commission. Anyone have any comments?
Yeah, let's go watch basketball.
Seeing none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
I motion that we adjourn.
Is there a
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.